There's a growing amount of discontent about the times we're living through. There's a changing of the mood from the Aussie easygoing attitude of yesteryear to one of an increasing amount of distrust in the system, leaving people feel as if they have a smaller opportunity to make it. As people trust their institutions and politicians less, it means that the institutions and politicians must take more desperate measures to keep hold of their control. We're going through a fourth turning. In this video, I'm going to go through what the fourth turning is, how it's all happened before, and hopefully it'll give you some context as to why I'm so big on taking 100% responsibility for your finances. I've been saying this for a while and I'll say it again. This decade, people will find out how poor they actually are. The perceived wealth that we had will recede, and we're starting to see that now. The Fourth Turning is a book that was written in 1997 by William Strauss and Neil Howe. They begin the book by explaining the word saeculum, and it's an old term which is derived from Roman times. The meaning of saeculum is that it goes for 80 to 100 years, and that represents a full human lifetime, and the idea that every saeculism represents a long-term cycle in our society. There are generally 4 parts to the cycle, and the fourth part is called the fourth turning. I'll explain this more in a little bit, but basically everything turns really bad for a while before there is a reset and things get better. Within that lifetime, there's generally 4 generations that go for 20 or 25 years. Every full lifetime experiences every turn. Before we get into the fourth turning, what we're going to do is we're going to set some context here, and we're going to go over each cycle and then circle back to present day. The cycle starts at what they explain as a high. This is after all of everything descends and then things become good again. The last time this happened was post-World War II. Everyone is on the same team now, and it's a lot easier for the government to get things done. The fourth turning happened, and then after it, everyone rallied together. It wasn't about the individual anymore, as opposed to the roaring 20s. It was about the people as one. If you look at where we are today, no one's really on the same page. I mean, you can't really say anything with offending anyone at the moment, and it's all about the individual. The next part of the saeculum is the awakening. The previous generation had to forego their individuality, and society had to bond together just to get through. The children now no longer have the same problems that their parents had. We're in the 60s now, and that's known as the consciousness revolution. It's now more about the individual, the spiritual awakening, the cultural upheaval. They don't like authority because of the raw deal they got being children in uncertain times. Escapism was a big thing in that generation. Escapism in the 60s was a lot of drugs basically. In our modern time, it might be the same. I tend to think that technology like augmented and virtual reality might fill that gap. To put it in another way, they'll simply just escape to the metaverse. The next turning is the unraveling. We're now in the mid-80s here, so the old wartime politicians are gone, the new politicians are in, and they're now reflecting the changing values of the next generations, who are all working families. In this time, trust in politicians is lower than it previously was. The national narrative is changing to an individual narrative. People don't care about the wars. They've been in a good, safe place for a long time, and now their interest is becoming more about themselves. I'm thinking all the talk shows, the fashion, the music, the art. People are more worried here about short-term gain, and I guess you just need to look at the Wall Street crash that happened in the late 80s as a punctuation of that sort of mindset. It's important to note here that the authors started writing this book in the first part of the saeculum. They predicted that some sort of black swan event would happen, let's say a financial meltdown, a terrorist attack, or a pandemic, for example. Basically, they explain that whatever happened would cause a chain of events which would expose the weakness in our society and economy. This is the start of the fourth turning, which is known as the crisis period. They predicted this would happen in 2007. In the fourth turning, societal trust implodes, older people can't save, and they find it hard to get by. Public promises, for example, welfare is no longer sustainable or believable. Middle-aged people will realise stagnating income. This has actually been happening for many years. We got deceived by reducing interest rates, which helped property prices rise, which caused us to feel wealthier than what we actually are. Young people face debt and tax burdens. Young people increasingly have student debts, which they get qualifications for that don't give them any leg up in the jobs market, and they have to borrow massive amounts of money to buy property. They haven't faced the tax burdens yet, although there's a fair argument that inflation is a tax on the young. The crisis of the fourth turning will reach a climax. We don't know yet what that is. Maybe it's war, maybe it's another pandemic, or something we just can't simply foresee right now. The crisis period that we're in will give rise to the new leaders of tomorrow. The new political visions will be forged and a new high will begin with trust reborn. I often think about this concept of the fourth turning and how we'll cope here in Australia, because we are in some ways insulated from the worst of this. When you think back on the later half of the last cycle, the tech boom of electricity and production lines, the Spanish flu, the Roaring '20s, the Great Depression and the two world wars, I think two things. And number one is we're lucky to be here where we are. But secondly, and probably more foreboding, is that things can get worse. I think that because we've had 30 years of prospering here, many of us have no idea how bad things can get. Most people my age and under have been able to go through and get a job at any time we want. I mean, just look at interest rates. There were many people that got used to 2% interest rates. That's never been normal in the history of debt. The place I grew up in was a place where people came together, and that provided opportunity for everyone. Right now, this is not a place or a time where people are coming together, and that's starving people of opportunity. Take responsibility for your own finances. Do you want to work till you're 80? Because super isn't going to cut it for a large group of Australians. Buying investment properties and sitting on your backside and doing nothing won't work for 90% of everyone. It's just naive. Please subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see the comments below. Cheers.